The convulsions started at dawn. They always did. Silas, the golden wolf pup who should have been the pride of the Iron Ridge, lay twisted on the stone floor of the Alpha King's solar, his small body seizing as black bile pooled beneath his muzzle. His breathing came in wet, strangled gasps, each one sounding like it might be his last. Alpha King Stellan stood over him, fists clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. The most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, a man who had crushed rebellions with his bare hands, was powerless against whatever was killing his son. How long? Stellan's voice was a low rumble that made the room vibrate. The head healer, an ancient she-wolf named Mara, kept her eyes down. 14 weeks, my king. The wasting has taken hold. I do not know how much longer he has. Educational insight. In wolf pack dynamics, the alpha's health isn't just personal, it's political. A weak or dying heir signals instability to rival packs and can trigger challenges for leadership. The entire pack's survival depends on the strength of its bloodline, which is why Stellan's desperation goes beyond fatherly love. It's about the future of his people. Silas had been trapped in his wolf form for months. Most young shifters learn to control their change by age 7, slipping between human and wolf as easily as breathing. But Silas couldn't shift back. It was as if his body had forgotten it was ever human. His golden fur, once radiant as summer wheat, had dulled to the color of dirty straw. His eyes, those bright amber eyes that should have sparkled with youth, were clouded with pain. Every morning the same violent episode, every evening the same labored breathing. The healers had tried everything: lunar blessings, ancient herbs steeped in wolf's blood, chants that made the windows rattle. Nothing worked. Perhaps, Mara hesitated, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. Perhaps the Moon Mother has judged him unfit. Stellan's head snapped toward her, his eyes flashing gold. Get out. The healers scrambled from the room. Stellan's decree had been issued 3 weeks ago, carved into the announcement stone in the Great Hall where every wolf could see it. Any healer, scholar, or mystic who can ease the suffering of the heir will be granted a lordship and land. Any who fail after attempting treatment will be exiled from the Ridge. It was a desperate gamble, and Stellan knew it, but he was a father before he was a king, and he would burn his entire kingdom to ash if it meant saving his son. 17 healers had tried. 17 healers had been escorted to the border in shame. The pup whimpered, a sound so small and broken it made Stellan's chest tighten. He knelt beside Silas, running his hand over the dull fur. The heat radiating from the pup's body was unnatural, feverish. "I will find the answer," Stellan whispered, though he didn't know if he believed it anymore. "I swear it." From the shadowed corner of the room, a cold voice cut through the air. "You swore that last week as well." Alpha Queen Jolene stepped into the light, her face a mask of elegant disdain. She was beautiful in the way a winter storm is beautiful, cold, sharp, and unforgiving. Her eyes, pale as ice, flickered over the convulsing pup with something that looked less like concern and more like irritation. "The boy is cursed, Stellan," she said, her tone flat. "Perhaps it is time to consider the succession. My brother's son is—" "Enough." Stellan's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Silas is my heir. He will recover." Jolene's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, my king. I only wish to spare you further disappointment." She swept from the room, leaving behind the faint scent of frost and something bitter that Stellan couldn't name. Silas's breathing steadied, the seizure passing as it always did, but the pup didn't rise. He just lay there, sides heaving, golden eyes staring at nothing. Stellan's jaw tightened. Someone in this castle knew what was wrong with his son, and when he found them, exile would be a mercy. Listen, this is only the beginning. If you think you know where this is going, trust me, you don't. Drop a comment if you've already spotted something the king hasn't, and if you want to see what happens when the blind maid enters this room tomorrow, you know what to do. The pup's sickness wasn't random, and the one person who would prove it couldn't even see. Blythe moved through the great hall like a ghost. Most servants walked with their heads down out of fear. Blythe walked with her head down because she had no eyes to lift. The linen bandage wrapped around her face had become as much a part of her as her own skin, a mark of her worthlessness in a world that measured value by strength. She was 23, though no one bothered to remember. She'd been blinded in a rogue raid when she was 13, or so the story went. The pack had kept her on out of pity, assigning her the lowest tasks, scrubbing floors in the dead of night, emptying chamber pots, fetching water from the coldest wells. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her unless it was to bark orders. She was invisible, and that invisibility had taught her to see in ways the sighted never could. Blythe didn't need eyes to know that the stone floor in the west corridor dipped slightly to the left, or that the third step on the servants' stair creaked only when weight was placed on its right side. She didn't need eyes to know when someone was lying. Their heartbeat would spike, their breathing would shallow, and their scent would sour like milk left in the sun. She felt the world through vibrations, through temperature shifts, through the way air moved when a body passed. And she smelled everything. Right now, she smelled fear. It clung to the walls of the solar like smoke. She'd been summoned here by the Alpha King himself, though she didn't know why. Servants like her didn't get summoned. They got forgotten. "Come here, girl." Stellan's voice was rough, scraped raw by exhaustion. Blythe stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. She could feel the heat of the fireplace to her left, the faint vibration of the pup's labored breathing to her right, and the oppressive weight of the king's grief pressing down on the room like a storm cloud. "The pup," Stellan said, his voice breaking slightly. He doesn't snarl at you. Why?" Blythe tilted her head, considering. She'd noticed it too. Every time she passed through this room to clean, the golden wolf would lift his head and whine softly, as if asking her to stay. The healers he snapped at, the noble ladies he growled at, but her, he let her touch him. "I do not know, my king," Blythe said quietly. "Perhaps he senses I mean him no harm. Or perhaps he's too weak to fight back anymore," a sharp voice cut in. Jolene. Blythe didn't need to see the queen to know she was standing near the window, her arms crossed, her pale eyes cold as a winter lake. The queen's scent was always the same, frost and something metallic like old coins. "The boy is broken, Stellan," Jolene continued, her tone dripping with contempt. "He cannot shift, he cannot lead. Perhaps the Moon Mother is telling you something you refuse to hear." "Enough." Stellan's voice was a warning growl. Blythe felt the shift in the room, the way the air seemed to tighten, the way Jolene's breathing hitched just slightly before she swept from the solar, her silk gown rustling like dead leaves. Stellan exhaled slowly, then gestured toward the pup. "Sit with him. Just sit. He seems calmer when you're near." Blythe knelt beside Silas, her hands hovering over his fur. The heat radiating from his small body was immediate, almost unbearable. She let her fingers drift down, brushing lightly against the golden coat. Silas whimpered, but he didn't pull away. Blythe began to hum, a low, wordless tune her mother had sung to her before the raid. Her hands moved in slow, soothing strokes along the pup's side, feeling the rise and fall of his labored breathing. And then her fingers brushed something that made her freeze. It wasn't the fur, it wasn't the skin, it was a knot.
small, hard, buried deep beneath the surface, and it was burning. Not the natural heat of a fever, this was different, sharper, angrier. Blythe's breath caught. She moved her hand slowly, tracing the area again, and felt another knot, and another. Her pulse quickened. "My king," Blythe whispered, her voice barely audible. "There is something wrong beneath the fur." Stellan straightened, his massive frame moving toward her like a mountain shifting. "What do you mean?" Blythe pressed her palm flat against the pup's spine, feeling the unnatural heat spike against her skin. "Something is buried here, something that does not belong." Stellan dropped to his knees beside her, his rough hands brushing over the same spot. He saw nothing, felt nothing but the warmth of his son's fever. "There's nothing there," he said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "You are looking with your eyes. I am feeling with my skin." She pressed harder, and Silas let out a sharp, pained yelp. "There," Blythe said urgently now, "right there. Do you feel it?" Stellan's fingers followed hers, and for a moment he felt it, a hard, foreign ridge under the skin, no bigger than a grain of sand. His blood went cold. "What is it?" he demanded. Blythe's jaw tightened. She didn't know for certain, not yet, but the burning sensation, the way it reacted to touch, the way Silas's body seemed to recoil from it, was silver, she whispered. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Did you catch that? Silver, hidden where no one could see it. If you're thinking what I'm thinking, drop a comment. And if you want to know how deep this goes, stick with the pack.
Silver? Stellan's voice cracked like a whip. His eyes flashed gold, the wolf surging just beneath the surface. "Are you certain?" Blythe's fingers hovered over the spot, feeling the unnatural heat pulsing beneath the pup's skin. She'd spent her entire life around wolves. She knew what silver did to them. Even the smallest shard was agony, like holding a hot coal against bare flesh. "I am not a healer," Blythe said carefully, "but I know the scent of burning. And this," she pressed lightly and Silas let out a strangled whine, "this is not fever. This is poison." Stellan's hands trembled as he leaned closer, his breath hot against the pup's fur. He searched, squinting, his massive fingers brushing over the same area Blythe had touched. He saw nothing. The fur was thick, the skin beneath it unmarred. "I see nothing," he growled, frustration boiling over. "There's no wound, no entry point. How could—" "Because it was meant to be hidden," Blythe interrupted, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Silver this small, buried this deep, it would be invisible to the eye, but the body knows. The body always knows." Silas's breathing had grown ragged, each inhale a wet, rattling gasp. His golden eyes rolled back slightly, his small body shuddering. Blythe's hand moved again, this time tracing the length of the pup's spine. She felt 3 more knots, 4, 5. Her stomach dropped. "There are more," she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "My king, there are more." Stellan's face went pale. "How many?" "I do not know, but they are scattered, buried in places where the fur is thickest, where no one would think to look." Stellan's fists slammed into the stone floor, the impact echoing through the solar. Who would do this? His voice was raw, a mix of grief and rage so potent it made the air vibrate. Who would poison a child? Blythe didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew. Whoever had done this had access, proximity, trust. This wasn't an enemy from outside the walls. This was betrayal from within. Blythe's fingers found the first knot again, the one near Silas's spine. She pressed down, feeling the shape of it. Small, cylindrical, no thicker than a strand of hair. The heat intensified, and her fingertips began to sting. She pulled her hand back with a sharp hiss. "What is it?" Stellan demanded. Blythe held up her fingers. The tips were red, blistering slightly where they'd made contact with the buried silver. Her human skin had protected her from the worst of it, but even she could feel the searing ache. "If this is what it does to me," she said quietly, "imagine what it is doing to him."
Stellan's jaw clenched. His son, his heir, had been burning from the inside out for months, slowly, painfully, and no one had known. He is being hunted from the inside, Blythe said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung heavy in the air. Stellan stood abruptly, his massive frame towering over her. If what you say is true, then we remove them, now. My king, You found them, Stellan said, his golden eyes locking onto her bandaged face. You will remove them. Blythe's breath caught. I am not a healer. I do not have the tools. Then I will get you tools. Stellan turned toward the door, his voice booming. Guard, fetch the healer's kit now. The door burst open moments later, a young guard stumbling in with a leather satchel. Stellan snatched it from his hands and threw it at Blythe's feet. Do it, he commanded. Blythe knelt, her hands trembling as she opened the satchel. Inside were salves, bandages, and a set of small metal instruments, tweezers, scalpels, clamps. She'd never used any of them. I do not know if I can. You will try, Stellan's voice softened, just slightly. Please. Blythe's hands stilled. She could feel the weight of his desperation, the way his fear had finally cracked through the armor of his authority. This wasn't a king giving orders. This was a father begging for his son's life. Blythe reached into the satchel and pulled out a pair of thin iron tweezers. The metal was cold in her palm. I will need you to hold him, Blythe said quietly. If the pain is as sharp as I believe it to be, he will try to run. Stellan moved without hesitation, his large hands gently pinning the pup's small body to the floor. Silas whimpered, his golden eyes wide and glassy. I am sorry, my son. I am so sorry. Blythe's hand moved again, this time tracing the length of the pup's spine. She felt 3 more knots, 4, 5. Her stomach dropped. There are more, she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. My king, there are more. Stellan's face went pale. How many? I do not know, but they are scattered, buried in places where the fur is thickest, where no one would think to look. Stellan's fists slammed into the stone floor, the impact echoing through the solar. Who would do this? His voice was raw, a mix of grief and rage so potent it made the air vibrate. Who would poison a child?
The sound that came from Silas was not a howl. It was a shriek, high-pitched, desperate, and utterly broken. The kind of sound that clawed its way into your bones and stayed there. Stellan's grip tightened on the pup, his own face twisting in shared agony. Keep going, he rasped, though his voice was thick with unshed tears. Blythe's hands didn't shake. She couldn't afford to let them. The tweezers dug deeper, parting fur and skin with surgical precision. She felt resistance, something solid, something wrong, and then, with a sickening tug, the metal came free. A sliver of silver, no thicker than a hair, no longer than a fingernail, dangled from the tweezers. It glowed faintly in the firelight, the edges stained with blood and blackened tissue. Silas went limp beneath Stellan's hands, his breathing ragged, but lighter. The tension in his small body eased, just slightly, as if a cord had been cut. 1, Blythe whispered. Stellan stared at the needle, his expression a mix of horror and disbelief. 1? His voice was hollow. How many more? Blythe set the needle aside, her fingers already moving to the next knot. I do not know, but I will not stop until I find them all. The second needle came easier. Silas barely flinched this time, as if his body was too exhausted to fight. Blythe worked quickly, her heightened senses guiding her hands. She could feel the unnatural heat, the way the silver disrupted the natural flow of the pup's energy. 2, 3, 4. Each needle she pulled sent another wave of relief through Silas's body. His breathing steadied, his whimpering quieted. Stellan watched in stunned silence, his hands still holding his son, his eyes fixed on the growing pile of silver slivers on the floor. Who did this? He whispered, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. Who could do this to a child? Blythe didn't answer. Her focus was absolute.
She moved to Silas's neck, her fingers tracing the thick fur along his throat. Another knot, another needle. 5, 6, 7. The pile grew. By the time she reached the 10th needle, Silas had stopped whimpering entirely. His golden eyes, once clouded with pain, were beginning to clear. His breathing was no longer labored. He was healing. Blythe moved to his legs, her hands working methodically. The needles had been placed with precision, always in areas where the fur was thickest, where even the most skilled healer wouldn't think to look. 11, 12, 13. This was planned, Stellan said, his voice low and dangerous. This wasn't an accident. Someone knew exactly where to place them, someone who had access to him, someone he trusted. Blythe's jaw tightened. She pulled another needle free, this one lodged near the left paw. 14. Silas's tail twitched. It was the first voluntary movement he'd made in weeks. Stellan's breath hitched. He's moving. Blythe allowed herself a small, grim smile. The poison is leaving his body. He is strong, my king, stronger than anyone knew. She continued her work, her hands moving quietly, confidently. 15, 16, 17. By the 20th needle, Silas lifted his head, his golden eyes, bright, clear, alive, locked onto Blythe's bandaged face. He made a soft sound, somewhere between a whimper and a chirp, and pressed his muzzle into her palm. Stellan's eyes filled with tears. "My son," he whispered, "my brave, beautiful son." Blythe pulled the 21st needle, then the 22nd. When she reached the 23rd, her hand paused. This one was different, buried deeper, placed directly over the pup's heart. "This one," she said quietly, "will hurt the most." Stellan's hands moved instinctively, cradling Silas's head. "Do it." Blythe pressed the tweezers in, and Silas let out one final piercing cry. The needle came free, longer than the others, its tip blackened and crusted with dried blood. 23. Blythe set it down with the others and moved her hands one last time over the pup's body, searching for any remaining knots. She found one more, buried at the base of his skull, hidden beneath a thick tuft of fur. 24. When the final needle hit the stone floor, the room went silent. Silas stood. For the first time in 14 weeks, the golden wolf pup rose to his feet. His legs wobbled, his body weak from months of suffering, but he stood. Stellan dropped to his knees, pulling his son into his arms, his massive frame shaking with sobs. "You're safe," he whispered into the pup's fur. "You're safe now." Blythe sat back, her hands stained with blood and silver residue, her body trembling from the effort. On the floor before her lay 24 silver needles, 24 deliberate acts of cruelty, 24 pieces of evidence. Stellan's head lifted, his tear-streaked face hardening into something cold and terrifying. "Find them," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Find every person who touched my son in the last 6 months, every groomer, every servant, every healer. I want names, I want confessions." He stood, still cradling Silas in his arms, and when we find the one who did this, his golden eyes blazed with murderous intent. Blythe rose slowly, her legs unsteady. She reached down and picked up one of the needles, holding it up to the fading light. "My king," she said quietly, "these were not made by a common craftsman. This is royal silver, refined, expensive." Stellan's face went pale. "What are you saying?" Blythe's voice was steady, but her words cut like a blade. "I am saying that whoever did this had access to the royal treasury." The implication hung in the air like a noose. Someone close, someone trusted, someone who wanted the heir dead. 24 needles, 24 reasons for revenge. If your blood is boiling right now, you're not alone. Drop a comment if you think you know who did this, and if you want to see justice served the way only an alpha king can deliver it, stay with the pack. This story is just getting started.
The great hall was sealed before dawn. No one in, no one out. Stellan's orders were absolute. Every servant, guard, groomer, and attendant who had touched Silas in the last 6 months was to be brought before him. No exceptions, no mercy. The massive oak doors groaned shut, their iron bolts sliding into place with a finality that made even the bravest wolves flinch. Inside, the air was thick with fear and the acrid scent of suspicion. Stellan stood at the head of the hall, his arms crossed, his face carved from stone. Beside him, Silas rested in his wolf form, still weak but alive. The pup's golden eyes tracked every movement, every whispered word. Blythe stood in the shadows near the hearth, her bandaged face turned toward the proceedings. She didn't need to see to know what was happening. She could hear it in the trembling voices, smell it in the sweat-soaked panic that clung to every accused soul. "Bring the first one forward," Stellan commanded. A young groomer was shoved to the center of the hall, her knees buckling as she dropped to the floor. She was 19, barely more than a girl, her hands stained with oils and herbs from her trade. "Did you place silver in the heir's fur?" Stellan's voice was low, dangerous. "No, my king," the girl's voice cracked. "I swear on the Moon Mother I would never." "Then who did?" "I don't know. I only brushed his coat. I never—" "Next." Stellan waved her away with cold indifference. One by one they came, the stable hands who cleaned Silas's bedding, the guards who stood watch outside his chambers, the cooks who prepared his meals in wolf form, raw meat, seasoned broths, bone marrow. All denied, all terrified, all dismissed. Hours passed, the pile of names grew shorter, the tension in the hall grew tighter. And then the royal jeweler was brought forward. His name was Callum, a wiry man with silver-streaked hair and hands that never stopped shaking. He'd served the crown for 30 years, crafting rings and ceremonial blades, repairing heirloom armor. He was also one of the few with access to refined silver. Stellan's eyes narrowed as Callum was forced to his knees. "You work with silver." "I do, my king." Callum's voice was thin, reedy. "But I would never harm the heir. I have children of my own." "Then explain this." Stellan held up one of the 24 needles, its blackened tip gleaming in the torchlight. "This was pulled from my son's body, royal-grade silver, refined, expensive, the kind only a jeweler would have." Callum's face went pale. "My king, Did you make these?" Stellan's voice dropped to a growl, the wolf surging just beneath the surface. I shaped the silver, yes, but—" The hall erupted, gasps, snarls, a ripple of rage moving through the assembled pack like wildfire. Stellan raised a hand, silencing them. "Continue." Callum's words came in a desperate rush. "I was commissioned. I didn't know what they were for, I swear. I thought they were needles for embroidery, for some royal garment." "Who commissioned you?" Stellan's voice was deadly calm now. Callum's mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted toward the side of the hall, where the royal family's private seating was arranged. "Speak, or I will rip the name from your throat myself." Callum's shoulders sagged. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "The Queen." The hall went silent. Not a breath, not a movement. Stellan's face didn't change. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. But his hands, his massive, scarred hands, began to shake. "What did you say?" His voice was soft, too soft. "Alpha Queen Jolene," Callum said, his voice breaking. "She came to my workshop 6 months ago. She told me the needles were for a personal project. She paid me in gold and swore me to secrecy.
I didn't ask questions. I should have, but I— Where is she? Stellan's voice cut through the air like a blade. The guard standing at the door stiffened for a heartbeat before sprinting from the hall. Blythe's hands tightened into fists. She could feel the shift in the room, the way the pack's loyalty was beginning to fracture, the way doubt was creeping in like frost. This wasn't just about Silver anymore. This was about bloodlines, succession, power. And Jolene knew exactly what she was doing.
Jolene didn't walk into the great hall. She was dragged. 2 guards flanked her, their hands gripping her arms, but she held her head high. Her pale hair was immaculate, her gown spotless, her expression one of calm indifference. She looked like a queen being escorted to a banquet, not a traitor being brought to judgment. The pack parted as she was pulled forward, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Jolene had been their queen for 12 years. She had stood beside Stellan through wars, famines, and territorial disputes. She had borne the weight of the crown with grace. And now she stood accused of murdering the heir. Stellan rose from his seat, his entire body radiating fury. Is it true? His voice was low, vibrating with barely controlled rage. Jolene met his gaze without flinching. Is what true, my king? Did you commission silver needles from the jeweler? I did. The hall erupted again. Gasps, snarls, shouts of disbelief. Stellan raised his hand, and the noise died instantly. Why? His voice cracked on the word. Jolene's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Because the boy is not mine to protect. Stellan staggered back as if she'd struck him. What? You heard me, Stellan. Jolene's voice was cold, clinical. Silas is your son, but he is not my blood. The hall went deathly silent. Stellan's face twisted in confusion. You carried him. You gave birth to him. How can you— Did I? Jolene tilted her head, her pale eyes glittering with something dark and triumphant. Or did you simply believe what you wanted to believe? Stellan's breath hitched. What are you saying? Jolene took a step forward, her voice rising so the entire hall could hear. I am saying that Silas is the bastard son of a human tavern wench you bedded during one of your many trips to the lower villages. I am saying that when you returned with a squalling infant and begged me to claim him as mine, I agreed, because I loved you, because I believed you would see reason and sire a true heir with me. The pack murmured, the sound building like a wave. But you didn't, did you? Jolene's voice turned venomous. You poured all your love into that half-blood mongrel, and I was left to watch as my position crumbled. So yes, Stellan, I placed the needles. I watched him suffer, and I would do it again. Stellan's hands clenched into fists. He is a child. He is a lie. Jolene's voice rang out, sharp and clear. He cannot shift properly because his blood is polluted. He is weak because his mother was human. And you, she pointed a trembling finger at Stellan, you have endangered this pack by placing a half-blood on the path to leadership. The pack's murmurs grew louder. Wolves began to exchange glances, doubt flickering across their faces. Stellan's authority, once absolute, was beginning to fracture. The law is clear, one of the elders spoke up from the side of the hall. His voice was reedy but firm. A half-blood cannot lead a pure pack. It is written in the old codes. Silas is strong, Stellan said, his voice desperate now. He survived the silver. He is healing. He survived because a blind servant pulled needles from his fur, not because of his bloodline. The boy is compromised, Stellan. You know this. Jolene's smile widened. You see, even your most loyal wolves question the wisdom of your choice. The pack demands purity. The pack demands strength. And Silas, she glanced at the golden pup still curled near Stellan's feet, is neither.
Stellan looked around the hall, his golden eyes searching for support, but the faces that stared back at him were uncertain, conflicted. He was losing them. Blythe stood in the shadows, her hands clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She could feel the shift happening, the way Jolene's words were poison, spreading through the pack like the silver had spread through Silas's body. And she knew in that moment that silence would be the death of them all. "You are wrong," Blythe's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. Every head in the hall turned toward her. Jolene's smile faltered. Stellan's eyes widened. "Blythe." "You are wrong," Blythe said again, stepping forward into the light. Her bandaged face was eerily calm. "I can prove it." Oh, this is where it gets good. The blind maid just challenged the queen in front of the entire pack. If you're sitting on the edge of your seat right now, good. That's exactly where you should be. Comment if you think you know what Blythe's about to reveal. Trust me, you're not ready.
The hall held its breath. Blythe stood in the center of the stone floor, small and unassuming, her bare feet silent against the cold ground. She looked fragile, a blind servant girl with no rank, no power, no voice. But when she spoke, her words carried the weight of truth. "The law you cite," Blythe said, her voice steady, "was written 300 years ago, when packs fought for survival and purity was the only shield against extinction. But times have changed, the world has changed, and clinging to old fears will not protect you, it will destroy you." One of the elders scoffed. "And what does a blind maid know of pack law?" "I know that strength is not measured by blood alone," Blythe said. "I know that Silas endured 6 months of silver poisoning, poison that would have killed a full-blood wolf in weeks. I know that he is still here, still breathing, still fighting. That is not weakness. That is the mark of a survivor." Jolene's voice cut through the silence, sharp and mocking. "Pretty words, servant, but words do not change the law. Silas is half-blood. By our codes, he cannot lead." "Then your codes are broken," Blythe said simply. The hall erupted, shouts of outrage, snarls of disbelief. "How dare you? She is a human herself. She has no right to speak." "Enough." Stellan's voice boomed through the hall, silencing the chaos. His eyes were locked on Blythe, his expression unreadable. "What are you saying, girl?" Blythe turned her bandaged face toward him. "I am saying that the law was designed to protect the pack, but when the law itself becomes a weapon used to harm the innocent, it is no longer justice, it is cruelty." Jolene laughed, the sound cold and bitter. "Listen to her, Stellan. She speaks like a philosopher, but she is nothing. A blind servant with delusions of wisdom. The pack will never follow a half-blood heir, no matter how eloquently his defenders plead." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Stellan's jaw tightened. He could feel it slipping away, his authority, his power, his ability to protect his son. The pack was turning, not because Jolene was right, but because fear was easier than change. "The queen is correct," another elder said, stepping forward. "The law is clear. If Silas is confirmed to be half-blood, he must be removed from the line of succession. To do otherwise would invite chaos." "And who would take his place?" Stellan's voice was dangerously quiet. "Jolene, the woman who just admitted to poisoning a child?" "Not Jolene," the elder said carefully, "but her bloodline. Her brother's son is pureblood, strong, uncompromised." Jolene's smile returned, cold and victorious. "The pack must survive, Stellan, even if it means setting aside sentiment." Stellan looked around the hall, his eyes searching for loyalty, for support, for anything to hold on to. But the faces staring back at him were closed, uncertain. He was alone. And then Blythe reached up and began to untie the bandage around her eyes. "What are you doing?" Jolene snapped, her confidence faltering for the first time.
Blythe didn't answer. She unwrapped the cloth slowly, deliberately, letting it fall to the floor in a heap. When she opened her eyes, the hall gasped. They weren't clouded. They weren't scarred. They glowed, amber, bright, unmistakable, the eyes of a wolf. "I am not blind," Blythe said quietly. "I never was." Stellan staggered back, his face pale. "Blythe, I wore the bandage to hide what I am," she continued, her voice unwavering. "To hide the fact that 10 years ago, when you thought the human tavern wench had died in childbirth, she didn't. She survived, she healed, and she stayed in the shadows, watching over her son." The hall erupted into chaos. Jolene's face twisted into something ugly and desperate. "Lies! She's lying to save the boy." "I am Luna-born, a wolf without scent, often mistaken for human. We are rare, forgotten, but we are not weak." Stellan's knees hit the stone floor. You're his mother?" "I am." Blythe turned toward him, her expression soft. "And I have watched you love him, protect him, fight for him every single day. You are his father in every way that matters. But Jolene is right about one thing. Silas's blood is not pure." She turned back to the hall, her voice rising. "But his heart is. And if this pack cannot see that, then perhaps it is not the heir who is unfit to lead." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time, the pack had no answer.
Stellan couldn't breathe. His chest felt hollow, carved out, as if someone had reached inside and pulled his heart from his ribs. He stared at Blythe, at the woman he thought was a broken servant, a shadow in his halls, and saw her for the first time. The glowing amber eyes, the elegant line of her jaw, the way she stood now, not with the timid hunch of the powerless, but with the quiet strength of someone who had survived a decade of hiding. "You were dead," he whispered, his voice raw. "I mourned you. I buried—" "You buried an illusion," Blythe said gently. "A body wrapped in linen, a story you needed to believe so you could move forward." Stellan's hands trembled. "Why? Why did you leave? Why did you let me think—" "Because Jolene would have killed me." Blythe's voice was steady, but there was an edge of old pain beneath it. "The night Silas was born, she came to the lower village. She told me that if I ever tried to claim my son, she would make sure neither of us saw another dawn. So I let her think she'd won. I let her believe I was just another human casualty, and I came back as someone she would never notice." The hall was silent, every wolf transfixed by the unfolding revelation. Jolene's face had gone pale, her composure cracking. "You're lying! Luna-born are myths, legends." "Are we?" Blythe turned toward her, and for the first time there was fire in her voice. "Or are we simply convenient to forget? We are wolves without scent, born to human mothers and wolf fathers. We shift late, sometimes not at all until triggered by trauma or necessity. We are invisible to your laws, your hierarchies, your precious bloodline doctrines, and that terrifies you." One of the elders stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "If you are Luna-born, prove it. Shift." Blythe's jaw tightened. "I cannot, not yet. My wolf sleeps deep, as it does for all my kind until the bond awakens it. But my eyes do not lie, my blood does not lie, and my son—" She turned toward Silas, who was watching her with wide, unblinking golden eyes, "carries the strength of both worlds." Stellan rose slowly, his legs unsteady. He moved toward Blythe as if in a trance, his massive frame towering over her. When he reached her, he stopped, his hands hovering near her face, afraid to touch her, afraid she might vanish. "You stayed," his voice broken. "All these years, you stayed." "I never left. I just learned to hide in plain sight."
Stellan's breath hitched, and then, in front of the entire pack, the Alpha King dropped to his knees. He pressed his forehead against Blythe's hands, and his shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me for not seeing you, for not protecting you, for letting her—" "There is nothing to forgive," Blythe said softly, her fingers brushing through his hair. "You loved our son. That is all I ever needed." The pack watched in stunned silence as their king, the man who had never bent, never broken, wept openly in the arms of a woman they had dismissed as worthless. And then something shifted. The air in the hall grew warmer, thicker. It pressed against the skin like a living thing, humming with an energy that made every wolf's instincts scream in recognition. Stellan's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "Do you feel that?" Blythe gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The sensation was overwhelming, like a thread pulling taut, snapping into place, locking around her heart with a force that stole her breath. The mate bond. It had been there all along, dormant and unrecognized, buried beneath lies and years of separation. But now, with the truth laid bare, it ignited. Stellan's wolf surged forward, his eyes blazing gold. "You're mine," he breathed, his voice thick with awe and disbelief. "You've always been mine." Blythe's knees buckled, and Stellan caught her, pulling her against his chest. The bond wrapped around them both, undeniable and absolute. The pack felt it too, the shift in power, the rightness of it. This wasn't a king and a servant. This was an alpha and his true Luna. Jolene's scream shattered the moment. "No!" Her voice was shrill, desperate. "This is a trick. She's manipulating him. She's using some kind of sorcery." "Enough!" Stellan's voice was a thunderclap. He rose, still holding Blythe close, and turned to face Jolene with eyes that burned with cold, murderous fury. "You tortured my son. You tried to kill my mate. And you stand here in my hall and dare to speak of manipulation?" Jolene's face twisted into something ugly. "She is nothing, a scentless mongrel who tricked you into—" "She is everything," Stellan's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "And you are finished." The pack began to move, closing in around Jolene like a noose tightening. There would be no escape, no mercy. Justice, long delayed, was finally at hand.
Jolene was stripped of her crown before the sun set. It wasn't a gentle removal. The silver circlet was torn from her head by the same guards who had once bowed to her, their faces hard with disgust. She clawed at them, screaming, but no one moved to help her. The pack had made their choice. Stellan stood at the center of the great hall, his arm wrapped protectively around Blythe. Silas sat at their feet, his golden eyes fixed on the woman who had poisoned him, his small body tense and ready. "Jolene of the Frost Line," Stellan's voice rang out, formal and final. "You are hereby stripped of your title as Alpha Queen. You are cast out from this pack, your name erased from our lineage, your deeds marked as treachery." Jolene spat at his feet. "You cannot do this. I am of noble blood. I have rights." "You have nothing." Stellan's voice was ice. "You forfeited your rights the moment you placed silver in a child's skin." The elders who had questioned Silas's bloodline only hours before now stood in silent agreement. Whatever doubts they'd harbored about a half-blood heir paled in comparison to the horror of what Jolene had done. Poisoning a child wasn't politics. It was unforgivable. "The law allows for execution," one of the elders said, his voice grim. "For crimes of this magnitude, death is the standard sentence." Jolene's face went pale. "You wouldn't dare." "I would," Stellan said. "But death is too kind for you." He gestured, and two guards stepped forward, carrying a small wooden box.
When they opened it, the contents gleamed in the torchlight. A collar, silver, delicate and deadly, lined with 24 needle-thin spikes, each one forged from the same royal-grade silver that had been pulled from Silas's body. The hall went silent. Jolene's eyes widened in horror. "No, no, you can't!" "You wanted my son to suffer," Stellan said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You wanted him to feel the burn, the agony, the slow poison working through his veins. So now you will understand what you inflicted." Blythe stepped forward, her amber eyes glowing. "This is the law of the needle," she said quietly. "For every act of cruelty, an equal measure of justice. You planted 24 needles, you will wear 24 more." The guards grabbed Jolene, forcing her to her knees. She thrashed, screaming, begging, but her words fell on deaf ears. The collar was fastened around her neck. The moment the silver touched her skin, Jolene shrieked. It was a sound of pure agony, raw and animalistic, as the needles bit into her flesh. Smoke rose from the points of contact, the smell of burning skin filling the hall. She clawed at the collar, but it was locked tight. Removing it would only drive the needles deeper. "You will wear this until you reach the frozen wastes," Stellan said. "Every step will remind you of what you did. Every breath will burn. And when you finally die, alone and forgotten, the wolves will not mourn you." Jolene collapsed, her body convulsing, her screams echoing off the stone walls. No one moved to help her. Stellan turned away, his voice cold. "Take her to the border. Release her beyond the ridge. She is no longer our problem." The guards dragged Jolene from the hall, her screams fading as the heavy doors slammed shut behind her. Silence settled over the pack. And then, from the corner of the room, a sound. Soft at first, a whimper, a shift. Silas. The golden pup's body began to shimmer, his form rippling like water. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded, limbs lengthened. For the first time in 6 months, Silas shifted. When the light faded, a boy stood in the center of the hall. Small, thin, his golden hair matted and his skin pale, but alive, whole, human. Stellan dropped to his knees, pulling his son into his arms. Silas clung to his father, his small hands fisting in Stellan's tunic, and then, in a voice hoarse from disuse, he spoke his first words in half a year. "I'm okay, Papa. I'm okay." Blythe knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face. She reached out, hesitant, and Silas turned toward her. For a moment he just stared, his golden eyes searching her face, and then he smiled. "Mama?" Blythe's breath hitched. "Yes, my love, I'm here." Silas launched himself into her arms, and the three of them collapsed together, holding each other as if they could make up for 10 years of separation in a single embrace. The pack watched in silence, and for the first time in months, hope flickered in the great hall.
3 months later, Silas ran. Not because he was fleeing, not because he was afraid, because he could. His golden wolf form tore through the forest trails of the Iron Ridge, his paws barely touching the ground. He was still small for his age, still lean and wiry, but the sickness was gone. The poison was purged, and the boy who had once convulsed on cold stone floors now moved like lightning. Stellan watched from the ridge above, his arms crossed, a rare smile tugging at his lips. Beside him, Blythe stood with her hand resting lightly on his arm, her amber eyes tracking their son's movements with quiet pride. "He's fast," Stellan said. "He's free," Blythe corrected. Stellan turned to her, his expression softening. "Thanks to you." Blythe shook her head. "Thanks to the truth. I only spoke it."
In the months since Jolene's exile, the pack had transformed. The old laws, the ones that demanded purity above all else, had been re-examined, not erased but rewritten. Strength, the council had decided, was not measured by bloodline alone. It was measured by resilience, by courage, by the ability to endure suffering and emerge stronger. Silas had become the living proof of that philosophy. The pack adored him, not because he was perfect, but because he was real. He had scars, invisible ones, etched into his soul by months of torment, but he wore them without shame. He laughed easily. He asked questions. He challenged traditions not out of rebellion, but out of genuine curiosity. He was going to be a remarkable king. But he wouldn't rule alone. Blythe had been offered the crown, the title of Luna, the formal recognition of her bond with Stellan. She had refused. I am not meant to rule. I am meant to protect. There is a difference. Stellan understood. Blythe had spent 10 years in the shadows, watching, guiding, protecting without recognition. She didn't need a crown to validate her worth. She had something far more valuable, the trust of her family. Now, as Silas bounded back up the ridge, his human form emerging mid-leap, he crashed into Blythe's arms with the unrestrained joy of a child who had been given a second chance at life. "Did you see me? Did you see how fast I was?" His golden eyes sparkled. "I saw," Blythe said, brushing the hair from his face. "You were magnificent." Silas grinned, then turned to Stellan. "Papa, do you think I'll be strong enough to lead one day?" Stellan knelt, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You already are, Silas, not because of your wolf, not because of your bloodline, but because you know what it means to suffer and you choose kindness anyway." Silas's brow furrowed. "Is that what makes a good king?" "That," Stellan said, "is what makes a great one." Blythe watched them, her heart full. This moment, this family was what she had fought for. Not power, not recognition, just this. As the sun dipped below the ridge, casting the iron ridge in shades of gold and amber, Silas turned to Blythe with a thoughtful expression. "Mama, you always wore the bandage because you wanted to hide, right?" "Yes," Blythe said. "But you don't need to hide anymore." "No, I don't." "Then why do you still see things no one else can?" Blythe knelt, meeting her son's gaze. "Because true sight has nothing to do with eyes, my love. It has to do with listening, feeling, trusting what the world tells you, even when it whispers." Silas considered this, then nodded solemnly. "I think I understand." "You will," Blythe said, "and when you're king, you'll lead with that understanding. You'll see what others miss, you'll hear what others ignore, and you'll be stronger because of it." Stellan placed a hand on Blythe's shoulder, his golden eyes warm. "He'll be the king we needed but never deserved." Blythe leaned into him. "He'll be the king who changes everything." And as the three of them stood together on the ridge, watching the stars emerge one by one, the pack below began to settle in for the night. They didn't know it yet, but the boy who was poisoned, who was dismissed as weak, who was written off as unworthy, that boy would grow to be the greatest alpha the Iron Ridge had ever known. Not because he was pure, but because he was true. And truth, as Blythe had always known, was the only thing that could never be hidden. This is where the story ends, but it's also where it begins. Silas grew up to be a king who ruled not with fear, but with empathy, who listened to the voices others ignored, who saw strength in difference and power in compassion. And every decision he made with the memory of 24 silver needles, a reminder that cruelty is a choice, and so is kindness. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, then it did what it was meant to do. Join the pack, share this story, and remember, the eyes can be deceived by gold and titles, but the skin never forgets the touch of truth.